There are a lot of things about this case nagging at me. The only two things found in the morning on January 29th were the broken glass and blood drops. And those blood drops were from the upper layers of the snow. I'm going to show you this photo was taken right after John O'Keefe was moved. The EMT testified that this pink here that you're seeing was blood pooling. Does this look like grass to you that he's laying on? And look at the footprint, okay? So a footprint that has stepped a little bit into the blood. Look at how deep into the snow that footprint is. This up here is that glass, that drinking glass. So John O'Keefe was on top of a fair amount of snow when he was found. And I don't care what the narrative is, what some people might want you to believe. This is the photograph. And this was taken after John was removed and before the leaf blower thing happened. Now here's dash cam. You can see here that they are in the process of taking John O'Keefe away. Now, watch here. Watch what she does. She's going over here. She disappears here. So watch there. Nobody is guarding this scene. This is where John was. And you see, she's picking up a blanket, shaking it off. This is evidence. As soon as something touches that crime scene or victim, it's evidence. It could have all kinds of trace material on it. And she's just shaking it off and taking it away. And this would be when she picked up John O'Keefe's cell phone. And nobody's realizing this. And she puts the evidence in her vehicle. Now, that is not her fault. She is not expected to know better. But this scene was not guarded at all. And watch. She's gonna close the door and the evidence is gone. Why wasn't that blanket later seized? Why wasn't she stopped? Now, here's the leaf blower video. And this is after a while, it had been snowing. You see these blood drops? On top of the snow, the drops were on the upper layers of the snow, which means they landed there after there was significant snowfall. Look at how dark the blood drops are in the snow. Why is the pooling not as dark? Now we'll look at them. Look at this guy. Did you see that? He's moving. He's picking up a blood drop. He's touching the evidence with his hands. And as they walk around this scene, let's say, just for the sake of argument, let's say there was tail light or something there. Well, they're pressing it down. See how much snow? They're pressing it down, layers down. So you're not going to be able to tell when any item landed there. Because if it was on a top layer of snow, it isn't anymore. So remember, two things only were found on January 29th in the morning. The broken glass and the blood drops that ended up in the Solo cups. The broken glass was also not found on grass, and it would be a pretty cool magic trick for it to have remained suspended, hovering, waiting for snowfall before it decided to land. And then the CERT team came out there on January 29th, but in the evening. And there was quite a delay in that. In the meantime, nobody guarded that scene. The police had abandoned the scene. So all day long, it's sitting there unguarded, still in the control of potential suspects in-house. And for some reason, it took forever to get CERT out there. And according to Trooper B, the state police were notified at 6:44 a.m. that they would need to respond. So why was that scene not held until they could take over? So when CERT gets there, they find pieces of plastic that look like taillight, right? But guess what? All the evidence bags that we saw, look at this, the 18th of February, 3rd of February, on none of the evidence bags that we saw was the date January 29th. So where is the evidence, the pieces of plastic that was found on the 29th? Where are those pieces of purportedly taillight? How does that taillight get reassembled without the pieces found on the 29th? There would be extra pieces. So where did they go? And where are John's socks? We haven't heard about them at all. Might there be hairs on those? Harnett from the lab said she saw one shoe and noted red-brown stains on it, but I don't recall ever seeing a photo of that shoe or markers showing where the stains were. Why not? And we never heard from the lab about any tests done on John's hat. Why not? And we're shown a photo of this straw that was found much later. And although in that batch of evidence, as Lally presented it, there were some photos with a ruler, one taken in context so you could see the fire hydrant, so you could landmark sort of where it was in the bigger picture of things. But not so with this straw. We have a photo of a straw, and then they show a close-up, no ruler, and nothing showing it in the broader context, like where in front of the house was it found. And look at this. I'm going to talk to you about snow. I've lived in snow and ice my entire life. I've had a fair bit of experience with snow. Snow behaves in a predictable way. And when I saw these pictures of plastic, they stood out. You can see here, this is on top of the ice here and not encased in the ice. If this was sort of a natural thaw, one would expect there to be ice maybe here and in here where the sunshine isn't reaching it, right? One might expect water. One might expect these kind of ice crystals on top of some of it, right? Along here, you would expect to see that, but we don't. It's off. And you could argue, hey, maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the sun heated the plastic enough that there was enough heat transfer that would have melted other ice. But it's this one that proves to me that this piece of plastic was placed here. And I'll tell you why. Do you see the way this ice melts? This plastic piece is on top of that. You would not see this pattern here underneath this piece of plastic. You would see it over top. So we should expect to see this frozen bit, if that's the pattern, if that's the way it's melting, would be on top there and all the way here. See? All that should be on top. And that would be if the snow was melting in a fashion to reveal this plastic piece. This would be on top, not underneath. Further, if you wanted to argue that this section of snow and ice is melting independently of maybe what was on top of it, which is not how it works, by the way. And those of you who have lived in snow, you know that. Then this here would be different. This was placed here. This was placed on top of this snow. Let's have a closer look. It's clearly on top of that ice. And the ice melting, this pattern, confirms that this wasn't sort of a natural melt, because that corner should be over that piece of plastic. There were hairs and fibers found on John's shirts. The lab witness said she did not test those. Did somebody else test those? If so, when are we going to hear about it? If not, then why not? If John was dragged by the vehicle, then shouldn't there be fibers on the undercarriage or the flaps? But there was nothing. And we never heard about tests done on the second shoe that was found. And the second shoe that was found was so clean. Wouldn't there be salt and sand on that? And we never heard about that examination of the second shoe. Why not? And that second shoe looked almost new. And you can see on the bottom, there is what appears to be some dirt on the shoe, but not a ton of wear. And look in between here. It's clean. It's really clean. So I wanted to go back and look at the scene photos. So I've flipped this left photo here over because originally it was upside down, so it was hard to compare. And I'm trying to see the soles of the shoes, and I can't see enough to make any comment, really. except that they're both light in color or white. And the shoe on the left is the shoe that they said they found at the scene. And the shoe on the right is, according to Trooper B, the same shoe. So this image here, I've flipped upside down. It was originally the other way around. And I did that just so you could compare them side by side. And I thought, this shoe looks a little yellow. But then again, so does the snow. So I thought it might be the lighting. It's a different lighting, different camera lens, this sort of thing. So I decided to compare the whiteness in the whites. So I took a piece of paper from the judge's desk and kind of enlarged it, took a piece of white from here and enlarged it so you could compare the brightness of those whites. Then I went to this shoe here, and you can see that this snow, and this is where the camera is focused, right? So this snow is kind of yellowy brown, and this snow up here is more white. Now, some of that may be accounted for by camera flash. So I did the same thing in sort of trying to compare the whites. Here's the white of the snow. See, here's that white snow. That's from here. This white shoe and this white snow is not quite as bright white as this is. But what I do notice is this sole of this shoe is a little bit darker than even the yellow snow. And my guess is that the reason this snow is darker is because of salt and sand and maybe dirt. Now, none of this is scientific. People have asked if they had done DNA testing on the shoes, on the second shoe. And given the amount of contamination of pretty much all of the evidence, I don't think DNA would really be all that useful. But I do think what would be useful would be an analysis of the footwear itself, of the wear and tear. Look how new this shoe looks. Look inside. It could be just the camera. This is a photo taken the morning of January 29th. On the scene, they kind of kicked the snow away from the curb with their foot. This is the curb, and this is about as big of a context as you're going to get. And that's been one of the problems. Even when CERT searched, we don't know who found what piece of evidence. None of it was documented properly. And I keep going back to, where are all the pieces of tail light that were supposedly found on the 29th? Where are they? Because out of all these evidence bags we've seen containing pieces of plastic and glass, none of them say January 29th, a collection. They're all later in February. So how does the person at the lab assemble an entire tail light? So these pieces from the 29th, where are they? Would they just have extra pieces? I mean, you ever put something together and you have a couple of parts left over that are extra? Is it like that? Are they through with the lab witnesses? Did Harnett not take scrapings from John's jeans? If so, then why haven't we heard about it yet? And if not, then why not? There were hairs and fibers found on John's shirts. The lab witness said she did not test those. So did somebody else test those? If so, when are we going to hear about it? If not, then why not? And if John was dragged by the vehicle, then shouldn't there be fibers on the undercarriage or the flaps? Because there were not. If the injuries on his arm were from scraping along the ground or coming in contact with other debris, then why isn't any of that material found in his wounds or his clothing? Maybe it was found in his wounds and we just haven't heard about it yet. I don't know, but you'd expect there to be something in his clothing. If his wounds on his arm were from being dragged, then where are the tire marks on the lawn? And if he was dragged, then how was he also thrown several feet? And how does he land on top of snow that had not yet fallen? Tell me how that works. How does he not have injuries to his hips and ribs and knees? And where's the rest of the blood? The EMT said this is blood pooling. That's it? That's all there is? And sorry, this picture is blurry, but look at the blood drops in the snow. Look how dark they are compared to this. So here's the pooling. Here are your blood drops, right? Shouldn't the pooling be darker red? I mean, where did the blood go? Do you know why there's not a deeper red or more blood here? Because he wasn't actively bleeding long, or perhaps not at all, at the time he was laying in the snow. But these darker drops that are drops, not pooling, tell you that that blood, because this is a separate pattern, right? That blood dropped. So wherever that blood dropped from was obviously above the ground, not on the ground and pooling. So either he was upright and actively bleeding, or he was above the ground in some other fashion and blood dropped from him. Also, I know that people have been debating about the arm injuries as to whether their dog bites or scratches or both. It doesn't matter whether those are bites or scratches, but there are things about these injuries that do matter. One, they were not caused by a Lexus. And two, if their dog bites or scratches, doesn't matter. It would show that he was in contact with a dog. And if the dog was never out of the sight of Brian Albert, then that also means John was in contact with Brian Albert. So don't get hung up on whether they're bites or scratches, because that's besides the point. The point is they're from a dog. That's the point. Also, Chloe did not kill John. Chloe did not cause the blunt force injury over John's eye. Chloe didn't drag John outside to die in the cold. And why have we not seen a recording from Good's Cruiser of Karen and Jen, and Karen telling Jen to Google how long to die in the cold? A recording from inside the cruiser would put to rest questions about this. If they had such a recording, if that had happened, I'm pretty sure the Commonwealth would have presented it. Harnett from the lab said the majority of staining on John's clothing was blood. Okay, what was the rest of it? Was waiting to hear more, and we didn't. Was all of it John's blood? Why is no one explaining why at least one bloodstain pattern shows that John was upright while actively bleeding? There are at least 3 different bloodstain patterns on his shirt alone. One is consistent with pooling, but the other 2 are not. There are at least 2 different blood-stain patterns on his jeans, and there appeared to be blood on the back and the front. Well, if he's laying down on the ground, how's that happening? And we've heard about Brian Higgins' magic Jeep. What kind of pickup truck does he have? And why was that glossed over? We heard about his work truck, what kind of truck that was. We heard about his Jeep with the snowplow, but what kind of pickup truck he drove? That was just sort of skipped. And why were the boxer shorts excluded from evidence? It's not simply that they didn't show them or display them. They were not put into evidence. Why? Listen.
So are you not displaying the third item, but it's going into evidence? Or is it just the jeans and the belt going into evidence?
The jeans and the belt into evidence, Your Honor, with the court's permission.
So we can mark the bag and we'll remove the third item.
And do you remember that there were 2 shirts in one bag, the gray one and the orange one, and so the bag was marked accordingly. The bag would be marked 1 orange and 1 gray, and the scientist from the lab testified to that. So we know that's what the bag says. Yet, suddenly, somehow, those 2 items are in 2 separate bags. Now, does Trooper B know that they've been separated or not? Because listen to this little exchange.
Do you recognize that item?
Yes, I do.
And what do you recognize that to be?
It says it's a 1 orange t-shirt.
We know that the bag said 1 orange t-shirt and 1 gray long sleeve shirt. So did he just lie right there? Or was there a notation on the bag indicating that the orange shirt had been removed? And if so, by whom and when and why? What about the text between Jen McCabe and John. One was in green and one in blue. Did John have an iPhone? If John had an iPhone, the text bubbles shouldn't be green. So what's up with that? Who ordered the blood test for Karen Reed? Where was Brian Higgins between 12:30 a.m. and 1:30 a.m. on the 29th? How did Brian Higgins get into the scene at Fairview without being seen driving in with his snowplow on in the morning? Why didn't Julie Albert notice his plow there in the morning when she arrived with the donuts? We know he was there because another officer testified he saw him in the house. How does Jen McCabe know that John is dead an hour and a half before he's pronounced? And I'm having a tough time trying to put together timelines because, as it turns out, you can't actually rely on official records. And you can't rely on video evidence. And you can't rely on reports, some of which aren't even created till a couple of years later. You can't rely on the witnesses. And another thing about the timeline, we saw on dash cam Jen McCabe go into the house at Fairview at 6:34 in the morning, and the lights were off at that time. At 6:39 in the morning, the lights in the house came back on. Well, there was testimony that officers thought that maybe Jen should go in the house and wake up the residents, and the police outside saw the lights come on while they were waiting for the fire trucks. Well, at the point the lights came on, the fire trucks, everybody was gone. But in all fairness to that witness, he could have been talking about waiting for a fire truck for the second call police made to section Reed. But when these lights went on at 6:39, that was long before anybody made any call to police or to Carrie Roberts to get Reed back, or made any call for paramedics to come back to the scene for the section. So what's up with that? The bartender testified that last call is around 12:30 or 12:45. And when she was asked about the video from the waterfall, she was asked, are the times and dates on the waterfall video accurate? And she answered the date, yeah, and nobody followed up on the time. Well, look at the timestamp here. It's 12:17, and she's taking out the garbage. Everybody's gone. And you saw the band packing up and people leaving between 12 and 10 after 12, according to this timestamp. Well, it sounds like this timestamp might not be accurate. If last call is 12:30 or 12:45, and you can see they're closing up, the timestamp says 12:17. And for this to be off a little bit and for it to actually be later would fit better with the testimony of Ryan Nagel, who said he received a text from Julie at 12:15, but he didn't leave to go get her until about 40 minutes later. So that puts it closer to 1 o'clock. I wonder if the Commonwealth is going to present the computer information from Reed's vehicle. If there was a collision, it should show that, yeah? It will show where she was. Maybe we'll see her phone extraction and see where she was. And I'm not saying this time is indeed wrong. I don't know. And that's part of the problem with this whole case. It's been going on, and I now have more questions than answers. And it should have been the other way around. The discrepancy between the testimony that last call is around 12:30 or 12:45 and the fact that it's 12:17 and they're locking up, that hasn't been asked or answered or explained. And add that to the bartender's response when she was asked if the dates and times were accurate, and her response was the date, yeah. This case is a mess. I think there is a case being built here, but I don't think it's the case that the Commonwealth is trying to build. And by the way, when I say trust your gut, I don't mean ignore evidence. I mean exactly the opposite. If you're feeling like something's wrong, if your gut tells you something's off, doesn't quite make sense, doesn't sit right with you, trust that feeling and take the action on it, which is look further, be curious, ask more questions. Trust your gut. I'll see you in the comments.